Good afternoon, online pipe community. Ethan, Parsimonious Piper here. And today we have Morsels for Mental Manducation. We are going to get back to C.S. Lewis, Mere Christianity. Before we do, in a 2-star pipe by Lee Bulldog, smooth this time, I am smoking another bowl of the Gawath Hogarth Dark Bird's Eye, which we will talk about tomorrow. The last chapter, Lewis dealt with one of the most unpopular topics of Christian morality, which is sexual morality. But in that chapter, he focused almost exclusively on what has gone awry with our world's view of sex. So in this chapter, we're going to talk about the context for when sex is properly enjoyed. He doesn't exactly use those terms, but Christians, by their actions, Christians tend to be among the higher birth rate segments of most populations in which they reside, do tend to rather enjoy sex, as they should. The Christian view of marriage is that it is, in fact, a lifelong commitment. It's not something that just comes and goes. It's something that really is a union of a husband and wife. And that this unit, the division or separation of this unit, is the most painful human separation possible. Many of you who have suffered through a divorce can attest to that pain. That this is not just a relationship that, in the popular view, can be swapped easily when you fall out of love. Or for any other reason that you feel like that this relationship should be, again in the Christian view, much more difficult to sever. The growing Western view that marriage is simply a relationship of convenience has led to any number of social ills, demonstrably as the marriage rate and stability has gone down. Social ills such as poverty and crime have gone up. We'll hit on that just a little bit later. But yeah, this notion that marriage is just a convenience has had some really negative impacts on society at large. Part of the reason for this is that we have come to equate being in love with love. Falsely. The former, being in love, comes and goes. Any marriage, any couple who's been married for decades can tell you this, that the warm fuzzy feelings that they have for their lifetime partner aren't permanent. They're transitory. Love, on the other hand, love is an actual commitment. It's a choice that you make. It's not just based on warm, fuzzy emotions. It's a commitment to put the other person's best interest above your own. above your own interest, above your own wants. Nowhere near as easy to do as to say. Now, this is not to say that being in love is a bad thing. On the contrary, it's a rather marvelous state, but it's not a permanent one. It is not. It's not going to last forever. Unlike what we get from pop culture, that we have happily ever after endings in movies and novels and songs and such, and there is this longing for a permanent state of euphoria. That very longing is in many ways childish. And yet natural. We would love to remain in that state, but we don't. And the truth is that when that fades, and it will, then the real work of marriage, the real test of that commitment begins, because it takes effort to establish and to grow a marriage into something that's deeper and better than the infatuation that usually starts it. That effort is very real. But it's also very necessary in order to have a lifelong relationship. It's a choice you make. And it does have to be made by both partners. If one partner simply gives up, it's almost impossible to maintain the relationship. But that is, in fact, in a nutshell, that is the Christian view of marriage, is that it's a commitment. It's a commitment that you make to each other. It's a commitment that you make to society and to God. Lewis argues that if you're not really serious about that commitment, then it would be better just to cohabitate. To cohabitate. All right, now I got to look up the word. To live together. Than to get married, because you don't create a right out of two wrongs. Now he ends this particular chapter by delving very briefly into two other topics. And I want to talk about them just about as briefly as he does. One, what is the role of Christians, given our view of marriage, in legislation, particularly for this topic? It may surprise some of my viewers that I tend to agree with Lewis, that it's not the government's role to enforce Christian morality on all of society. Christians push back on that, but look how they react when government is used as a weapon against them, pushing things that we consider to be deeply immoral as normal. And if you disagree, you're a bigot. Christians don't like it at all. They shouldn't participate in it either. Now, the government does have an interest, I believe, in promoting marriage. Why? Because the government does have an interest in promoting things that are good for society. Now, does that mean mandating them? No. Or making them required? No. But promoting them? Yes, I think so. And greater intellects like Thomas Sowell have gone very deep into demonstrating the direct link between the breakdown of the family unit in the United States, at least, with the rise in those same populations of poverty and crime. And in fact, as some of those behaviors regarding sexual relations and marriage have become embedded in some subcultures, that poverty and crime becomes endemic. It's not easy to erase. The question is how to promote marriage without crossing that line into trying to legislate Christian morality. The second topic he does just a drive-by on is that of the Christian principle of the husband being the head of the household. And I say he does a drive-by because while I agree with his points, here's one of many places, now that he's talking about the Christian worldview, that I really think Lewis should back up what he's talking about specifically with Scripture. Far too many Christians have fallen into the trap of talking about the wife submitting to the husband without going deeper into that same exact scripture where only a verse later we're told that husbands should submit to their wives and love them as Christ loved the church. Well, that love of Christ for the church was sacrificial. It was putting the other's interest first. Truth is, there are not many wives out there who would have a problem submitting to a husband that loved them like that. Maybe some. I doubt that there are many. The problem comes back to the men, not the women. We don't talk about that in Christian circles very often. Let me wrap up with a little bit of good news. For those of you who would like to still have faith or belief in the institution of marriage, but have gotten discouraged, we are often told that more than 50% of marriages end in divorce. That is a partial truth, and it has been exposed for a few decades as a partial truth by none other than Michael Medved, not a Christian, a conservative practicing Jew. The last time I actually checked up on his numbers was after the 2010 census in the US, and he is usually pretty careful to make sure that his listeners or readers know that he is dealing specifically with American statistics on marriage. What he found and what I was able to confirm, again, I haven't looked at 2020 numbers to see if this trend has continued. What he found was that approximately 70% of first marriages do in fact last until one of the parties dies. 70%. So how do they get this more than 50% of marriages fail? Well, because technically it's true, but it's second, third, fourth marriages, because statistically in the US, you are more likely to get a divorce again if you have already gotten one. And that percentage goes up the more often you have been divorced. Now, is that to say that those of you who have been through a divorce should not get married? Nope, not at all. But you do need to do the same things with the second marriage to make it succeed that you would have to do with the first. There has to be that love commitment, not basing the marriage on an infatuation or an I like him or her now. And that's somewhat harder to do from what I've read. Haven't experienced it myself in second or later marriages. But success is attainable. It most certainly is. I've known a number of couples who their first marriage failed very early and they've now been married for 20 or 30 years. That's quite possible. So there's hope out there. Well, folks, that's going to wrap up what I'm going to talk about with Christian marriage and the Christian viewpoint on what marriage should be. I can also tell you it's a shame that more Christians have not faithfully held up this ideal and continued to espouse it as the ideal. We'd be better off if they did. Well, with that, dark bird's eye is a good blend. Might enjoy it. But light something you like. Enjoy the afternoon.